Welcome to Discastia, a podcast for parents and teachers about the best way to support kids living with learning difficulties. My name's Michael Shanahan, and I'm casting to you today from the lands of the Kaurna people. Today I'm talking to Leanne Tran about how to maintain your own mental health as a parent and navigate the whole landscape of parenting a child with a learning difficulty. Leanne, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks
Would
so
you
much
like to
for having
introduce yourself, Leanne? My pleasure.
Yes, sure. So you're right. I'm a psychologist. I've been working with children and adolescents for most of my career, which is about 20 years or so now. And a big chunk of what I do is assessment for kids who are either developing differently. Well, yeah, they all are, whether that's autistic kids, those with ADHD or learning difficulties, or a number of those things. And so I have a lot of time for kids who are not finding things as easy as the rest of their peers. I don't know why, there's a little sweet spot for kids like that with me. And I love being able to help them understand themselves in a way that they feel good about and empowered by. And then I try to offer the same for parents as well, to help them understand their child, how they can support their child, and, you know, give a sense of positivity about the path forward. Yeah, so I do that in my practice in Brisbane. Yeah,
yep,
it can be. Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, it can be. It is for most parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being there. And now part of the reason for this episode is I've just done an episode where we kind of looked at the top 5 kind of difficulties that kids living with learning difficulties have, like from a mental health perspective. You know, what are the top 5 challenges that they face? And I thought it would be a kind of a good pairing up to do the same thing but for parents, you know, and go look at the other side of the fence and think, okay, so what are the challenges that parents face? And you would see a lot of parents in your practice. So you've probably got a good handle on the typical kinds of things that parents experience. And I thought it might be good to look at it from kind of a timeline perspective. You know, if we go from the starting point of pre-identification, you know, where I'm a parent and I'm thinking, is there an issue here or am I imagining it? How do you navigate that? How do you know if it's real or you're just thinking your kid's got an issue? And take that all the way through to when we finally kind of let go of our kids and let them be independent, and how we navigate that kind of letting go process, and kind of talk about those stages that happen in between. So from that perspective, here we go. The scene is I've got a kid, my child, that's really struggling at school. Usually this is where it happens, isn't it? And, you know, from my personal experience, it was actually something we noticed like grade 1, grade 2, almost straight away. And the thing we noticed was actually anxiety in our kids before we worked out why they were anxious.
Yeah.
You know, the first kind of telltale sign was anxiety, and it took a little while to work out that, you know, it's this whole reading thing that's so hard, and the kid started to kind of lose their self-confidence and that sort of stuff. Now, as a parent, that was very stressful and difficult to navigate because, firstly, you're a bit lost. You know, you don't know what's happening or who to go to or who to speak to or where to get advice from. And there's a whole bunch of parental guilt in there of like, what am I doing wrong? Particularly if this is a first child and this is your first experience of this and this isn't what you expected. Yeah. So what's your experience of parents who are at this kind of first stage of, is there an issue? And you mentioned that you do a lot of assessments. So I imagine when you first meet people, this is the stage they're at.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's a few different experiences that parents can have, and it kind of depends on how their kids are presenting or what challenges their children have. And you mentioned noticing as a first thing anxiety in kids, and that can be, I mean, not can be, that is really stressful because we want to understand our kids and make sure that their needs are being met and that they are kind of coping and well adjusted. But I think sometimes when it's a mood that we notice or kind of behaviours we notice, it can give us a bit more guidance about what's happening, and that we have that sense that something's wrong. Parents react in a whole range of different ways to that, and there is a bit of like confusion and just not understanding and feeling a bit lost. Sometimes too they will ask people and get different advice, or some people will say, oh, don't worry about it, they're just little, or they're just a boy, or there's lots of things that people say to dismiss parents' concerns.
That was certainly our experience. The teachers at the school all said exactly what you just said.
Right.
Don't worry about it. He's a typical boy. It'll pass. You're worried about nothing, which actually makes you feel worse as a parent. It makes me think, it's kind of like gaslighting, isn't it? It's like, well, am I imagining it? But you don't have the confidence, especially if this is your first child.
Yes. And people say it because they're trying to be reassuring. But it's much like with our kids. If they're telling us they're upset about something and we say, oh, that's silly, you don't have to be. All they feel is just not listened to, and it doesn't help. And from a psychologist's point of view, I mean, obviously, this is what I do for a living, and I can see the benefit it has for kids. So I'm very invested in it. And anytime I'm not sure about something for my own kids, I'll be there seeking help from somebody. And on the flip side, when parents come to me, I'm never going to be dismissive, because I think if you're not sure and you go to talk to somebody and they just give you reassurance, that's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think.
Yes.
So I think, that's one of the challenges parents face.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of strategies could they use? So let's say I'm in that position right now, and I'm sure there would be some people listening, and not even necessarily parents, but teachers as well, or tutors like me. I often find myself in a situation with a student where I think, I'm getting a feeling here that they might be living with autism, or, something else is going on here other than dyslexia. But even in my position, I feel like, should I say something? Do I say something? And as a parent, I felt like that. I thought, who am I compared to a teacher? How do we, as parents, kind of get that confidence? Because I hear you saying that, the best thing is to seek that advice. But how do I make that step? Because it's also expensive. And so you don't want to do that and kind of think, oh, well, I've wasted that money now. These are the kind of thoughts that went through my head.
Yeah, it is, for sure. It's weighing up the risks and the benefits, isn't it? And that's one tricky part about the assessment process itself, is that you can never really know for sure until you do the assessment. So sometimes in my position, we are doing an assessment and finding actually things are all as they should, and it's potentially just anxiety. But I think I hear a lot of parents say to me too that they just trusted that intuition, that they didn't have all the information yet and the answers, and so they just kind of kept trying to find out more. And it might be, for example, talking to a different person. It might be talking to a GP, or it might be talking to a teacher or a tutor, or then maybe next year's teacher, to see what they think as well. Lots of parents too do things like listen to podcasts and read books to try and find out more. And I think all of those things to try to help or answer the question you have about understanding your child's experience and their behaviour is are good steps towards the right path. Yeah, and for different parents, they'll have different financial resources and that kind of thing, so they will but there's lots of free information out there if you can find it by for example, I'm in Queensland here. Spelled is a great organisation supporting people experiencing learning difficulties, and they've got lots of resources and information for parents. And so I guess that's
and I'll try and
advice.
put as many of the... Sorry.
That's okay, yeah.
I'll try and put as many of those as I can in the show notes, because they are actually a little bit difficult to find, and, you know, sometimes sometimes some of the things you find are a bit dodgy.
Yeah, that's right. That is true. But I think
yeah, go on, sorry.
I just wanted to say one more thing, because you mentioned about not being sure about whether to say things as a tutor as well. And I think I always approach it in terms of being curious about a child. So we're not, you know, if that's a great way to start a conversation, whether you're the teacher or the tutor or, you know, someone else in the child's life. It's difficult to say, look, I wonder if they, you know, they might be autistic or something like that. But if you can approach it with curiosity, for example, you know, I'm noticing that in terms of the extra support, it's helping with these things, but I'm also noticing these other things, and I'm just not sure about why that's happening. I don't know if you've thought about that, and just starting those conversations to open people's awareness to the things that might be underlying the challenges that a child has.
That's a great idea. I've never thought of that kind of flipping your thought process. Instead of seeing it, I think I'm seeing it as kind of an inherently negative thing. I think I have a bit of a bias there, that this might be a bad thing, that I say this to somebody. And so I'm kind of holding back because I think, oh, you know, I don't want to tell them that I suspect this. But I love that idea of just being curious and just saying, hey, I've noticed this happening. And I imagine, I don't know, but I'm just kind of shooting the breeze here, but I imagine like maybe keeping a notebook or a log of stuff might be useful to spot patterns.
Yes.
Have you got any kind of advice around preparing for that? You know, is there could you say that there are, you know, when these kind of circumstances align, might be time to get an assessment versus, you know, being able to make a judgment of this as just a typical developmental stage or place that a kid's at?
Yeah, I think my mind went to so many things. I did a big breath in too, because I was thinking, and I'll tell you why. This is why it's hard. Yeah. And this will be reassuring to all parents who find it hard. And I say this all the time in my clinic. It's that kids develop all the time. And so even if they've got challenges, they're still developing. And so it's a really common thing, I think, for parents to notice and have concerns about things like, for example, with reading. And then the teachers will say, oh, actually, you know, they've come a long way. They've, you know, developed some skills and they've improved. And you think, okay, great. And then the concerns come back and then they develop again. And so you can never really be sure of knowing, when do we seek help? But I always kind of bring it back to thinking about the functioning or expectations that we have of kids in general. And so from that point of view, I think teachers are a really good guidepost because they work with a lot of kids of the same age. And so you can really be asking about things like, you know, are they at the level that you would expect or that you're worried about in terms of their learning, but also how much progress are they making compared to the level of effort that they're putting in. And so sometimes teachers will say things like that the child's going okay, but it's just so effortful for them. They're putting in so much more work than other kids. And so it's about...
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. You know,
I think there's a little delay. That's why I think you've stopped talking. And then I say, oh, you've actually started.
I've been told I'm a slow talker as well. So I do And then I'll stop and probably think, and so my gaps are probably longer than most people. So don't
And I
feel
live
bad
with
about
ADHD,
it.
so I'm a chronic interrupter.
Okay.
No, sorry. I'm sorry that I interrupted you. Go on. Or have you lost your place?
No, I think I was just thinking about to say, try and think about if they seem to be struggling more than other kids their age, either because they're putting in more effort or they're not achieving the results, then I think that's a time to talk to somebody. And when you come and see a psychologist, the first thing we do is an initial meeting or assessment, and then you're not compelled to go on and do the further academic assessment that is the higher cost. It's just an initial conversation as well. So that always could be something that then puts your mind at ease, and you think, okay, well, we'll just monitor things for another year or so. Or it might be, give you guidance as to whether to go ahead or not.
And that was certainly our experience, because our first interaction with the psychologist was around anxiety.
Right.
And it was actually through that process that the psychologist was able to tease out, oh, actually, you know what, I reckon there's an issue here that might be behind the anxiety. As new parents, we didn't even know, dyslexia wasn't even part of our repertoire of thinking. So, we never went there. So it actually took that kind of professional help for us to identify it. What sort of things could I do? So let's say I've got concerns and I think, okay, it's time to see somebody. Yep. How can I prepare myself so that that first meeting with you is most effective and productive? Like, what sort of information are you looking for? And I know if you're someone like me and you're kind of put on the spot, I can just kind of freeze up and not know what to say. And it gives me a lot of confidence if I can kind of go prepared with some notes and, know the kind of things that you might be looking for or the kind of questions you might ask in that first kind of meeting or assessment.
Yeah, that's a good question. But I also want to reassure parents that there's all of us are different as humans, and so there'll be lots of different ways we do things. Often parents will come in and they will start talking and the conversation jumps all around and they go, sorry, and I say, no, like, you're trying to explain your child to me in an hour. It's our job to sort through it, so don't worry about that. But the first questions I always ask parents are, what are you hoping to get out of this conversation, if it's that, or this assessment? And because for assessments, diagnoses might be an outcome, that's one thing. But what I find that parents most want to know is what to do next. And so if you have some ideas about the kind of areas you want guidance in, then that helps guide the conversation. So, for example, if you might say, we just want to make sure they're getting the right support at school, or maybe we're thinking about doing speech pathology or tutoring or something else, and we just want to know where to best put our money. Some kind of idea about what you're hoping to get is good. And some parents come in with notes as well. They'll come in and go, okay, right, and they flip open their phone or their iPad and they go through. And that's great as well. If that helps you organise your thoughts and make sure that you don't want to miss anything, then go for that as well. The types of things we'll ask is general stuff about how your child has developed, what your concerns are at the moment, and it's normally in terms of, it would be learning at school, but it would also be around emotions, social interactions, behaviours, any kind of concerns about development, whether that's motor skills, fine motor, all of that stuff, because what we want to work out in that first session is how your child's sitting compared to what we'd expect for their age. And then based on that information, it guides us as to what to look at further.
Brilliant. So kind of summarising this first bit of I've got a concern, I'm not sure what to do with it, I'm not sure where to go. I think it's really reassuring to know that I can just go and see somebody like you without having to do a whole bunch of preparation, homework, note-taking, and that sort of stuff, because you are able to help sort through that. Because sometimes I think that might even be a barrier, you know, for myself. Doing something like that feels daunting. You know, what am I going to say? How do I prepare for this? So it's good to know that you can just turn up, because that's what you do, isn't it? That's what you're good at and practiced at, is being able to tease that out.
Yeah, and I think that's my job. That's my responsibility in there. You don't have to work that out as a parent. You just have to come and blurt it all out and go, so what do we do?
That's brilliant. And that's so relaxing to me. That's so reassuring, because I think, oh, thank goodness I don't have to make sense of all of this. And I think the other thing I'm hearing is to trust yourself. You know, if something just doesn't feel right, you know, and this is from my perspective as well as a tutor, because I know that the earlier a student gets support, the better the outcome. And, you know, I happily tutor students that don't have any identification or diagnosis, because I think we don't want to wait for that, because sometimes that can take ages. But it is about that, you know, balancing act of do I, don't I? Do I talk to someone? Don't I talk to someone? And I think what I hear you saying is if you're unsure, it's better just to go and get that advice. It may just be an initial kind of advice-getting conversation.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be launching straight into, I need an assessment.
That's right. And I think if then it gives that reassurance that parents need, then that's kind of what you're looking for is, do I need to change what we're doing here, or can we just keep going with how we're going? And if it can answer that question and, you know, allay any fears and give you that kind of confidence that you're doing the right thing, or you know what to do next, then that's, you know, we talked about initially kind of the emotional load of parenting when kids are developing differently. Some of that peace of mind is what can really free up your resources to then be that relaxed and happy and parent that you want to be, and focus on all the positive things in life as well.
Yes, that's right. It can be all-consuming, can't it, that worry and that concern. And so, you know, better to go and speak to somebody. It's kind of like thinking, oh, should I get that mole checked or not?
Yeah, exactly.
Go and get it checked, because if you don't, you're just going to be stressing about it. It's better to know.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, okay, so that's number one. We're in this kind of pre-identification anxiety area. But then let's say we've had a first meeting, or we think, no, actually, I think I need an assessment. A tutor or a teacher or someone has said, I think you need to get an assessment. Now, this is tricky to navigate, especially when you get the identification. You know, I remember when my son was diagnosed, I was living with dyslexia, it was like, it was almost a panic kind of state. It was like, because I don't even know what that means. Yeah. You know, I really felt lost. You know, and I know that the psychologist, she was so good. You know, she talked us through every little step, you know, very gently and logically. And honestly, I didn't take in a single word she said.
Yeah.
Because I was just going, oh, what does this mean? What does this mean? You know, I was off on another planet. And so that can be tricky. So what's your advice for a parent, or, you know, how do you go about it? Because you would have been telling a lot of people that they have an identification of something. You know, what's the advice for the parent that's received that identification, and the best way to kind of deal with all those kind of guilty feelings and so on that you have as a parent when you get that?
Yeah, there's probably, I have three initial thoughts, and one is about, the response to the conversation, which is usually a bit of shock. And then there's two different kind of reactions that parents commonly have. And the first thing is to think that, and I say this to parents a lot, it can be a shock even if you felt like you knew it was coming, or if you felt prepared for it, it can still be a shock.
Yeah.
And what happens to humans when we're in shock is that we don't take in information very well. So I think just be kind to yourself about that. Don't judge yourself too harshly for not, like you said, all the information was there, but your brain was just not taking it in. So I think I typically am able to give parents a little bit of feedback on the day of an assessment, but then the process that comes after that is a written report and then also a feedback session where I like parents to be able to have a chance to digest some of the information, and then we meet to talk through all of the questions. So I'd encourage parents to view that as an ongoing conversation as well. So you can always come back and ask more questions, and be pointed then in the right direction for other supports along the way, whether that's tutors or other organisations that can help, so that you can continually learn more and more, because you're not going to be able to take it all in at once. It will be like an ongoing discovery about your child and what it means for them and how they learn best. And then the two responses I see a lot is sometimes there's that kind of, it's a bit of a grief reaction a lot of the times. Parents are thinking, this isn't good news. I think it's good to say that it is a normal reaction. Because it's just not what we expect. And so I should preface that by saying I don't think it's bad news when you've identified a learning disorder or something like that in your kids, but I think it's normal to have that reaction of it like a bad thing, because we're worried for our kids and we're scared for their future and that kind of thing. So that's a really common reaction. It's also common...
I think from my perspective, I think from my perspective, I was like that. I had that grief, and I think it's because I just didn't understand what dyslexia was, and so everything that I'd heard about it, like in just mainstream conversation, didn't paint it in a positive light. Dyslexia was a difficulty, and you kind of think, okay, like, your child's life flashes before your eyes and you think, oh, no, this is a disaster because this is going to be so hard, blah, 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 blah. Your mind goes to that negative place. Yeah. But the more I've learnt about it, the less I had that reaction. You know what I mean? That reaction was kind of to the stereotype of what you might imagine dyslexia is, not the reality of it. The reality of it is quite different to what the kind of common perception of it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I was trying to highlight, I guess, because I think that working with heaps of kids who have learning challenges, and I don't see it in a negative way, but I understand from a parent point of view that this isn't the 600th kid you've seen like that. This is your one child and your maybe first child, and so it feels really different. And sometimes then the other thing is there can be, feelings of like that, maybe you've left it too late or haven't realised, and we can really judge ourselves harshly as parents for what we should have done better. But a secondary thing I notice quite a lot is that because these things are often have a genetic component as well, and so parents might then recognise their own experience in what's hard for their kids, and they can have almost this sense of recognition of what maybe they lost by not having these things identified and supported when they were kids. And so it's almost like this kind of, grief or worry for their own child, but also for them as a child and thinking what they missed out on. So it can be really overwhelming and emotional for parents. I always say the flip side is that what you've gone through and has been hard then gives you empathy for your own child, which is really powerful. But I think it takes a little while to get to that point of seeing it in that positive way.
Mm. And that was the exact case for me.
Right.
When the psychologist was describing my son and dyslexia, my wife said, "You're describing my husband, not my son." And I was like, what? What do you mean? That's not me, is it? And then the penny started to drop and I was like, oh, yeah, like this makes sense.
Yeah.
And so you're right. It's not only dealing with, like people in my case, it's not only dealing with your child's identification, but your own as well.
Yeah.
These are really big emotions. Yeah. So how do we look after ourselves within all of that? It's really difficult for the parent, who from my personal experience, my son was identified, but so was I. In one fell swoop, his life changed and so did mine. And they're really big emotions to deal with. And you think you've got to keep it together for your kid, but also deal with those emotions yourself. Yeah. How do you navigate that? Like, what kind of advice have you got for parents who, even if it's not a double identification, but just how do you navigate that care for yourself? Let's just forget about the kids for a minute and think, how do parents best care for themselves in that circumstance?
Yeah. Well, I think, firstly, my first thought was because you were saying you've got to keep it all together for your kids. I think maybe you don't have to keep it together as much as you think. I think I agree with what you're saying that it's our job to manage our own emotions so that then that pressure or responsibility is not on our kids and that we're regulated enough to be able to do what our kids need for us. But I think it's okay for our kids to see our reactions to all of that stuff as well. And talking our kids through what we're experiencing helps them learn how to manage emotions as well. And so, for example, saying that, you're just feeling really overwhelmed, there's so much information and I'm going to need time to process it, really models for our kids how they can manage their emotions as well. And so I guess because there's always going to be times when we get upset and lose it in front of our kids, and that's not always a bad thing. I think, though, the premise is to really make sure that we're looking after our own emotions because what kids need is a strong and stable parent. And so however that works for us, whether it's having, ways that you give yourself self-care through, daily or weekly little things, whether it's time for yourself, mindfulness, doing things with your friends or doing things that you enjoy, all of those things are good for our mental health. And sometimes all that stuff is enough. When it's not, seeing somebody professionally to talk about it, whether it's a counsellor or a psychologist or, even also just spending time to talk with a spouse or a friend about our challenges as well. It doesn't always have to be a professional, but I guess, intentionally talking about those emotions that are hard helps us manage it. And give ourselves time to process everything and adjust. That's probably the biggest word I would use. It's an adjustment. And so adjustments take time. Some will take a little bit of dedicated self-care. Some will take a lot of help and support, but giving ourselves time and what we need in that process to adjust to it is a good thing to do. And it's good for us in terms of how we cope and manage, but it's also going to have a flow-on impact on our kids as well, because looking after ourselves actually improves the well-being of our kids.
I love the idea of seeing it as an adjustment. Not, because I tend to catastrophize things. It's just the way my brain works. But framing it as an adjustment also implies that I will adjust. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a positivity within that attitude, because sometimes when you're in the middle of something like this, it feels like you're never going to adjust. It feels like you're going to be feeling like this forever.
Yeah.
Because, you can't kind of see the other side. But, having gone to the other side now myself, I look back on it and I think, the word adjustment is perfect, actually, because it is. Your brain just adjusts, doesn't it? It becomes your new normal, that this is just how things are.
Yeah, and it's taking in all of that new information and processing it. And, it's... Yeah, I don't know.
What about guilt? So I know that I experienced a lot of guilt. My mind just jumped to all the potential things that I might have done to cause this.
Yep.
I think, oh no, did I not read to them enough? Did we not give them enough food? Like, all these things jump into my head of like, this is somehow my fault.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that kind of parental guilt, which honestly I don't think I've ever been able to really deal with it. It's always something that's there.
It's a really hard one, and I have many conversations. I think too, because my mind goes to how sometimes there's genetic components to these things as well, and I'm thinking particularly when I'm working with families who have ADHD and things like that. And so no matter how much I say to them to try to reassure that those little decisions and choices didn't have the impact, they say, yeah, but it's genetic, so that they like it was me.
Ultimately, scientifically proven, it's my fault.
That's right. One thing is to go through the facts of it all, and that we know factually it's not that you didn't read to your kids too little. But what we really have to do as parents to let ourselves believe those facts is to think that we had, to think about what we've done in a positive way. So, for example, even if, you didn't read to your child much when they were little, you can think, well, I was doing the best that I could and that I knew how to do. Maybe you were working a lot because your kids needed to eat food and you didn't have time to read. And so trying to recognise that we did the parents have done the best they can. And that can, that's what we call as a psychologist kind of doing that reframe of a thought. So it's reframing it in a positive way. And really, I would say that our brains just take a lot of repetition to be convinced of those things. And so if we're focusing a lot on the things we didn't do, we're going to feel like that's true and we feel awful about it. Whereas if we try and reframe it all of the time, that can lead to us eventually being convinced, and perhaps then those more positive ways of thinking about it don't line up with the feelings like guilt and embarrassment or sadness. They might line up with more of those feelings of kind of positivity or happiness and resilience. So if we can try and change around the way we make sense of what we've done in the past, that's probably the best way. But it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And, just to set the record straight, not reading to your kid doesn't cause dyslexia or learning difficulties, even if you don't. I wonder as well whether it is about how kind of disability and difficulty is framed in society. And so, you know, I think for me something that helped was reframing learning difficulties as not inherently negative.
Yeah.
Because then there is no fault or blame or guilt to lay because this isn't actually something bad. And so what are you guilty about it? It's just a thing. It just exists. It's just like I've got blue eyes, I've got blonde hair, I live with dyslexia. I'm not going to be guilty about having a kid with blonde hair and think, what did I do?
Yeah, that's right. And I thought before, I noticed that you and I are both wearing glasses, and because how I explain learning difficulties to kids a lot of the time is that we are all different and we all have things that are easy for us and things that are not so easy. Some things we can do well and some things we can't do so well. And I use the idea of glasses a lot and then say, you know, because there's normally someone they know in their class or something that wears glasses. And I say, do you think that they're dumb because they can't see? And kids will go, no, of course not. And so try and use that as a way to reframe. But then also to say, and so then do you think it would be fair, though, if they're not allowed to wear glasses at school because, because kids often will say they don't want the extra help or support or that kind of thing. And so try to frame it as though, like, we would never expect someone who can't see to go to school without their glasses. So we can't expect you to go through school without the help that you need. And so just try to really normalize it and compare it to how we do all have individual differences. And for some things, people need support, like a pair of glasses, and for some kids, they need other things.
And I'm not a bad parent because my kid needs glasses.
Yeah, that's right. We don't judge it the same way, do we? Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so we've had our identification and we go through this adjustment period, which I love the idea of thinking of it as an adjustment. And now we're kind of into the advocacy support. And so this is quite tricky. This is kind of, in my mind, the next stage of you've got the identification. There's a whole lot of beautiful recommendations written in the report from the psychologist. You go to the school to kind of put in an individual learning plan. And kind of from that point onwards, you're not only a parent, but now you're becoming an advocate for your child. And honestly, that can be quite exhausting, I find.
Yeah.
Because not everything goes your way as an advocate. You know, you think it's very reasonable to say, you know, as an example from myself, you know, we wanted to have our child not learn a second language because they were having trouble learning English. Not learn a second language, but instead have that time as tutoring time for literacy to try and catch up. But the school refused that. So that's like, as a parent, how do you navigate that and maintain your sanity? Because it's exhausting and it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Firstly, that is annoying. I would be supportive of that recommendation for kids. I think, there's a couple of things. I'm trying to think, like, what I often put in my reports is things about what a child needs so that they can access the curriculum. And I feel like that's a phrase that sometimes schools take seriously because that's their job and they are legally required to let kids support them so that they can access the curriculum. And I do have a guide on my website which it helps people prepare for advocating for schools, and so it's got some scripts and questions to ask and things like that. So that could be a good place to start as well. I would say too to always have that approach of, trust your intuition again. And if you feel like the support you're getting is just not enough, to kind of keep asking for it. Parents often say to me, we don't want to be that parent. No, and it's such a common phrase. And others will say, well, I don't care. This is my child. That's what they need. And so probably the balance lies somewhere in the middle, because if we're advocating in a way with, for reasonable adjustments and are persistent with that, I think you probably get more success. There are always times when you don't. I think that's, it's one of the downsides of trying to advocate to a system. They're bigger than us, they're more powerful than us, and sometimes they will just say no. I think at the end of the day, there's probably a lot of decisions schools can make that aren't the best and aren't probably in our child's favour, but that it's not going to impact our child long term too much. And so trying to, I guess, pick for yourself what you think are the ones that are absolute necessities, and then think about the others as, just things that would be good but aren't going to ruin things, is a good way to go. I mean, it's hard to know what's what, I agree. But trying to just focus on those main big ones in terms of probably literacy and numeracy and that kind of thing is a good guide. I got to say too, I would probably be tempted then to think to my kid, like, well, I'm not going to encourage you to do any of that language homework at home or anything like that. I'll just be doing what I can do. Well, yeah, I would, because I think, what are the important things that my child needs to do? And with our limited resources at home in terms of my child's energy and effort, what are we going to put it into? And my guide for that normally is what kids enjoy and what they're good at. And so for some kids, they might find literacy hard, but they really like it and they want to read. Then that's great. Go ahead and put all your effort into that. For other kids, they hate it. They don't want to do it, but they're awesome at some other thing. And so I would say maybe put your efforts into that instead. And I think that then creates a level of resilience and happiness for your child where the things that aren't going so well don't matter as much. That feels like a big roundabout. I don't know if it actually answered your question or not.
Well, I think so. I think as well, thinking about advice for the parent dealing with that kind of pushback from a system.
Yeah.
I think for me personally that you've hit the nail on the head there with it being a systemic issue. And often I think teachers get blamed. And it can become kind of inflamed on a personal level with the teacher, but actually the teacher's part of a big system and the teacher can't even change it if they want to. And so I think, speaking from my personal experience, the most difficult thing to deal with emotionally as a parent is the systemic inequity. The system is not built for our kids. And that level of frustration, I find that the most difficult to deal with. So, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's reaching that point of, it's really impactful exhaustion. You can burn yourself out fighting against the system when in reality, are you going to be able to change this or not? And then how do you accept that and still be happy? You know what I mean? That's a really tricky one for me.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's about the resources that you have, which are finite, like the amount of energy and time you have to put into things. Even for someone like me who's worked inside systems before, it's really hard to change them. But systems are different as well. So schools are really different. In Brisbane, there's such a big range of the type of culture schools have and the type of support that they will offer and provide, the level at which they expect you to justify needing the support and that kind of thing. It varies wildly from school to school. And so I'd suggest if you're feeling like the school's just really not a good fit for your child, and they are, they don't want to go, they're having behaviour challenges when they're there, and you have this sense that it's because their needs just aren't being met, your chances of changing that are not great. So perhaps look at what your other options are. And some schools, it's hard because it's not a choice that all parents can make about choosing what school their child goes to or that kind of thing. But it's definitely worth looking around to see what other schools can offer. And I think if you meet with a school, you do get a real sense of their culture and their kind of approach to things like learning challenges and that kind of thing, and disability and inclusion and support. Sometimes too, so you might want to change schools. Sometimes too, you meet with a few others and you think, okay, so they're all kind of like this, and it helps you know that it's probably just something that you're not going to be able to change. Yeah.
So you think, how do I do my best within that system?
Yeah,
kind of accepting that you can't change it, which I find difficult. But, if you're beating your head up against a brick wall and becoming, that parent, maybe it's time to kind of reassess and think, is this productive or not? But that's really tricky to navigate because your emotions are so high.
That's right. Yeah. And I think it's a little unfair for me too, because I have this different sense, because I work with lots of people and it's what I learn about and do, that I have this different kind of view about what kids can cope with and what they'll be okay with versus what will be a really harmful thing. And so I'm probably a lot more along the lines of thinking, well, let's just, I don't know. I might not view it as such a big thing as other families do and other parents do. But that made me think too that what you can do and focus your energy and time on is teaching your kid to advocate for themselves as well. Teaching them to accept support, to ask for support and advocate for what they need. So even if that's in a time when they're not being listened to, maybe the next year things will change with a different teacher or, I don't know. But that's also a lifelong skill that kids will benefit from. So even if they're stuck in this place now where things aren't going so great, if they can learn how they learn how they learn and learn to advocate for it, that's going to help them beyond school and in jobs and further study and everything. So, thinking about where you want to put your energy is probably a good guide.
It's a brilliant life skill. And, if we're thinking about parents as models for our kids, they pay a lot of attention to how we behave. I have seen some kind of, I've seen parents get very frustrated and some of that frustration rub off onto their kids. And the kids become negative about the system. Like the kids kind of pick up an attitude of kind of being powerless within a system. And I have never seen a good outcome to that. I see that leads to kids rejecting the system, not wanting to go to school. So I think there is, not that I'm putting any guilt onto parents here, but I think that being able to spot where this is something you can influence and something that you can't is good modelling for a student who might be struggling and kind of, modelling that behaviour themselves, and then they start acting out and kind of rebelling against the system, which isn't all that productive.
Yeah.
Have you got any advice around that, around how do I have that personal struggle as a parent but model an ideal behaviour for my child? That's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky. I do see that as well in some situations, and it can be, that kids get this negative view about school or a negative view about their teacher as well. If parents complain about the teacher a lot, whether it's justified or not, then kids kind of start to, first of all, I guess they think then that's okay to complain about the teacher or say mean things, and that always gets kids in trouble at school.
And it's not productive. And, I really feel for the teachers there because, honestly, in a very, very, very small percent, it may be the teacher's fault, but, 99.99% of the time, the teacher's in the same boat as everybody else.
Yeah,
and trying to do the right thing, and I often see that kind of misplaced blame, you know what I mean? They kind of bear the brunt of it. So what kind of mindset do we need to have as parents so that we don't fall into that trap of, butting our head up against the system and blaming the teacher and so on, that kind of negative spiral?
Yeah, I think there's probably a mindset shift and then a behaviour one too. And the mindset one is trying to take a step back, I guess, but which can help, like trying to step out of the emotion of it, which is very difficult, and trying to see it from that rational point of view of what, how much choice does the teacher have around this? How much choice does even the school have around this, given that they are in a system that gives funding for certain things and allows some things and not others? And always trying to, I think, rather than, focus on our agency or how much choice and control we have about how to do things. I often talk with kids about the circle of control. There's some things we can control and there's lots of things we can't. And the things that we can control are our beliefs, our thoughts and our actions. And so trying to think then as a parent, okay, that's all I can control. So what will I do? I will keep advocating, or I will each year pass the information on to the school, because then I've done my bit as a parent, and then, accepting that how the school do things is how the school do things. And that's modelling to our kids then to take personal responsibility for things about, our learning and that kind of thing. But the behaviour shift, I think, too, is to maybe be really wary of how much they're overhearing us talk about the teacher and the school and that kind of thing. And to think about how they might be private, separate conversations where you talk to your partner about how crap it is and this and that. But to try to not let our kids hear that is another thing as well. So it's our own separate frustrations that we're dealing with and managing that our kids don't necessarily need to know about.
Mm. Yeah. And because keeping that relationship productive is so vital, isn't it? And once a student thinks their teacher's an idiot or this or that, if I hear them say it, I think this is a really slippery slope, isn't it? Because how do you learn from someone if you're sitting there with contempt? It's not a one-way street. It's not just up to the teacher to maintain a good relationship. There is that kind of parent and child half of it, isn't there? And I think teaching kids that skill of maintaining a relationship when you're frustrated and things aren't going the way you want, is valuable, is a valuable skill.
Yeah. And I guess it undermines the teacher as well. Like if we think about it as parents, if our co-parent, we're kind of talking about how they don't know what they're doing and they made a dumb decision and this and that, it undermines the respect our child has for that co-parent. And it's the same thing that can happen with teachers as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't have a good outcome. I haven't seen a good outcome from
No.
that. So, I think being wary of that. And I think your suggestion is good. If you need to have those conversations, don't have them in front of the child. But, when you're with the child, I think it should always have a level of respect and, really model that kind of regulated behaviour and attitude, and as much as possible try and maintain that positive attitude, because that is really tricky when you lose it. Okay. Now, this is related to this, I think, but as a parent, you don't always have the money for a tutor or support like I offer or like you offer. And I know that a lot of parents find it extremely difficult to navigate teaching their child. You know what I mean? Like, often when I'm tutoring a kid, I'll say something and I'll see the parent kind of roll their eyes or say to me afterwards, I've said exactly the same thing, and they when you say it, they listen. When I say it, they just tell me I'm an idiot. How do we foster, as parents, that relationship with our child where we can actually have a productive relationship with them, so that you can actually help your child with homework rather than get away from me kind of pushback? I don't know what the mechanism is behind that. Have you got any insight into that?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's having that double relationship. Our parent is meant to be the one that accepts us as we are and loves unconditionally whoever we are. And then the teacher role is that one that's corrective, or it's kind of telling you that there is a right way to do it and this is how you do it. And sometimes there's just the friction that comes from those things. Sometimes it's our ability to remain calm as a parent while we're having these conversations with kids. And I don't know if you find this, but I certainly do, that it's a lot easier when the kids aren't mine to be calm about how they're responding and talking to me. And so trying to, again, take a step back from the emotional part of it is helpful.
Let's say I've got a young child. Let's say they've been identified and they're 6-7 years old, still malleable. Kids at that age are still very fluid in their attitudes and that sort of stuff. What sort of things could I do as a parent to kind of sow the seeds then at that early stage to try and avoid potential friction later on when they get older and they might need that homework help or support at home? Is there something I can do to prepare that landscape to try and avoid, if possible, that pushback later on?
Yeah, I think so. There's, I always say, which might link into our next part, which is about the results of school, but it's never really our ability to learn that we can control. It's our effort and our attitude. And so if we start young, when our kids are young too, of praising or acknowledging those things, like the effort a child's putting in, that's a really positive thing. Imagine each time they're sitting down to do some homework that's not particularly fun or easy, and you're like, wow, you just worked so hard on that for 5 minutes. And these prep and grade 1 kids are like, yeah, I'm awesome. And it's starting out small, 5 minutes or so, or however long they do it for, and you're just acknowledging that the effort they put in, they start to feel good about that effort and that they are a person who puts in effort. And maybe it's about like that was tricky for you, but you kept at it, or you didn't give up on that, and focusing on the attitude as well. And the other thing too that I do a lot, and this is, I guess, with my own kids, but also in therapy with kids, is ask questions about things like, what's tricky about this for you? So you're really trying to have those calm conversations that's a normal part of homework and helping before you get to that point of like where you're frustrated and they're frustrated. And it's helping them break it down. So they might say, well, like I'm thinking now about my teenager and assignments, and it's about, I don't understand the question, or I read it, I understood it, but then I don't know what to do. So it's thinking, okay, well, then I know what I can do to be able to bridge that gap for you or help you. So if you start out by acknowledging effort and attitude, and also having open conversations about what's tricky for you, then it sets up that as being a kind of like positive experience.
Yeah, I think positive experience is a big part of that, isn't it? If I mean, that's not to say every experience has to be positive, but you can build up a bit of kind of capital there, can't you?
Yeah.
Of like, if most of the experiences are positive, then yes, there may be a meltdown, but in the context, it's still an overall positive experience.
Yeah.
And I think pressure is a lot to do with it. I think understanding that kids that live with learning difficulties face pressure all day. And so if they get home and a parent's helping them, and I think their expectations of their parent are even higher because the parent's like safe space.
Yeah.
And if the parent starts applying pressure, that's like, oh, get away from me. Like I've had a whole day of that, and I'm feeling this pressure and I'm feeling out of my depth. And then I come to you for support and I just get more pushback and more, why haven't you finished this? Like, so that kind of pressure, I think, is really tricky for kids to deal with. And so I think having, instead, like you say, support with simplifying and breaking it down and removing the pressure so those interactions become a positive thing, I think could potentially help avoid it. Yeah, it is tricky though, isn't it?
Yeah. Sometimes too, I think it's about maybe switching up how you do things to try to make it more positive, and sometimes even a little more fun as well. And one example is, because we're just talking about, and I was imagining it too, after school, but sometimes kids are tired by that. And for some kids, doing things before school may be a lot better. For some kids, it's doing it on a Saturday morning because they're not great at getting up early, but they're tired at the end of the day. And so families will help them on the weekend in the morning when they're a bit fresher. And so sometimes thinking about, whether you change things up to be at a time when it's more optimal for your kids, or, bringing some fun into it. I'm known for doing afternoon tea while there's homework being done. So there's like, it's automatically a bit more positive when everyone's got Oreos and milk.
There's that positive association there, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. Or are you doing the writing on the chalkboard, or like, outside on the ground, or when my kids did sight words. I don't know if they still do them. They probably shouldn't, but sight words back when they were little, and they would ride past on their bike, and I'd be the gate, and they have to do the sight word, and then they go through the gate, or, something that makes it a little bit more fun. Or that's what I wanted to say too. That was because, sometimes it's hard for kids to sit still, and they need to be burning off some energy while they do this stuff. So, yeah.
Very hard for them to sit still. And in some ways, I'm a little bit jealous of the parental experience, because when I'm tutoring, I don't have a choice about the time slot. And so most of my kids are in that horrible tired phase where they've just had a whole day of school. And I think, this would be so much easier if I could grab them when they've got some energy and not kind of already exhausted before we start. So I think that's a great advice, being flexible and judging the situation instead of saying, it's after dinner or after school, so it's homework time. Instead, basing it on what are their energy levels. Let's try and find a time where they're actually perky and feeling regulated, and that's a better moment to do it, rather than, I think they get home and they let go and they relax, and then getting them to start back up again.
Switch back on again, yeah.
It's very hard. Yeah. Yep. And I think when they come to me, they know they're coming, so they haven't quite switched off, because I'm kind of more like school again.
And Yeah, and there's also an expectation, I think, because you're a person outside the family, that there's a level of respect and engagement that's expected.
Mm.
Whereas when kids are at home and with their family, that the expectations are different.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's probably worth noting too that, like, as kids get bigger as well, there are natural developmental changes that they go through, like teenage years, where their job is to try to be their own person and separate from, being a child of a parent. So there is that natural kind of pushback and rebellion that happens in the teenage years.
Yeah.
And so that, seeing that, if that's happening as probably a normal part of development, makes it less personal for parents, I think. But this one piece of advice is not a psychology piece of advice. My mother-in-law gave me this piece, and she was saying that sometimes then you're not the right person to be doing that. And she often utilized someone else in the community or school community who was maybe 2 or 3 years above where her kids were, who can be a bit more of a cool role model and someone more relatable to be able to do that tutoring and homework help. So that, thinking about that there might be times when you might not be the best person, and how else could you get some support, and
Great
can be
idea.
worth thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. So next one on the list, and we kind of started to think about that, which is that unfortunately school results, and, we've talked about the school system and how in many ways, and not in all schools, but, in many ways the system's not designed for kids that are struggling like this. And so effort is often not reflected in results. And that's really tricky for kids. So, with our kids, we always said to them, we don't care what your result is. We didn't put any credibility at all in the result on their school report. We just ignored it. We just said what we're interested in is comments about their attitude from the teachers and the effort that they put in. And we kind of had our own assessment of them, if you know what I mean. And we just said, forget about grades. But this is really tricky as a parent because grades are important. And so it is stressful because you kind of think, well, how are they going to get into the course they want to get into? And, how do we as parents navigate, the kind of distress and anxiety that gives us around getting those school results that we know are not reflective of the effort our kids are putting in. How
I
do
do
we
the same
navigate
thing.
that?
Yeah, it's tricky. I do the same thing you do, where my kids say, we get the report card and they'll say, oh, what did it say? And I'll say, it said that you should be proud of the effort you put in. So we would just focus on the effort and the attitude that kids put in. That's the only bit you can control. I think it's really good to, again, have those conversations with your kids as well, so they know that's the important part. I think too, what we know about school grades and things is that they're a very good predictor of how you go in school, but they are not a great predictor of how you go in life. And that's the mantra that I follow when I interpret the results, but also what I say to other families as well. So it's still hard to say that and know that, but then look at the grades. But I just have to keep coming back to the fact that what's going to really set our kids up for success is how much effort they put into things, the attitude they have towards things, how much responsibility they take for what they can do in the world, and also to follow what they're interested in and what they're good at. And I think if kids do that, then the next steps in their path will always be open to them. There is a lot of pressure on, people say a lot, have that concern a lot about getting good grades so that then they can, get into whatever it is they want to study and that kind of thing.
Got more choices.
That's right. And I think that is true to an extent, but there are always multiple paths of getting somewhere. And so, for example, if kids don't get into the course they want to do, there are lots of options to do something else for a year and then switch over or change. But also, my perspective from being a psychologist is that kids experiencing a lot of pressure and distress and anxiety around their grades also doesn't set them on a good path. And in fact, that's, a really risky path, I think, of having stress and mental health difficulties that can be, equally kind of, that kind of prohibits you from taking the next steps that you might want to take as well. So I think it's all you can try and focus on is the next best thing. And if you're focusing on the attitude and the effort and then, making the best choice about what's going to be the next right thing to do, whether that's which high school or what to do after high school, that's really all you can do. We can't really create the path for our kids we want them to have. All we can do is try to help them blossom and grow and kind of just see where that takes them.
And I think I love what you said there. We can't force that path because, as you were saying that, I was thinking, I think that's where a lot of my anxiety as a parent came from, is I was almost trying to will them into success. You know what I mean? I was like, I've invested so much energy into trying to will it to happen. And, sometimes that might even spill over then into applying pressure and that sort of stuff. But, thinking about what you said there and thinking, just hold on a sec, that, maybe that's not the best way to spend my energy. Things have changed a lot. I don't think that the Year 12 results are as important as they used to be. I think things are getting better every year, as you say, with alternative pathways. And there's always a way. I think there's always a way, within reason, to find your way into what you want to do, even if your school results, are not going to automatically give you a place. That's what it's about, isn't it? It's about automatically getting a place. But there's always those alternate pathways.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So last one on our list. I've put you through the ringer here, haven't I?
That's okay. I was just thinking we were talking about the last one of letting go, and you've just kind of mentioned how you feel like you've slipped into that place of trying to maybe engineer for someone. And so, do you need to know how to let go?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so this is the last one. And this is kind of the stages, isn't it? And you mentioned before that natural developmental stage when kids become teenagers and they want to, separate themselves from their parents. You invest a whole bunch of energy as a parent advocating and, it becomes a big part of your life to do this. And then your kid reaches a point where they don't want that anymore. They don't want you to contact the teacher. They don't want you to talk to the school. And, all of a sudden you're not part of that. How do we let them go? As parents, how do we, what's the most healthy way to kind of give them that independence but still be there ready? I know with our kids there were a couple of false starts with that, where they insisted that I don't help them. But then the pressure mounts, and, they need the support again. I kind of think that's healthy, even though it doesn't feel pleasant at the time. But what are your thoughts about that? How do we make that transition from giving them that independence but still have them know they've got that safety net?
Yeah. I think psychologists, we always advocate for gradual changes. And so that's in terms of, our job is to kind of make ourselves obsolete as parents. And that's in a really gradual, staged way. And so it might be about when kids are little, you advocate for them. As they get older, you're, letting them know what you're asking for and still advocating for them. Then becomes a place when maybe you can sit down and do this together, where you might talk about what, I've got ideas about what support I think you need. What are your ideas? And you can form that together and then advocate for this at school. And then you do need to be teaching your kids how to do things like ask for help themselves and that kind of thing. So it's partly about gradually handing over the process to them. It's also about building skills. But then for us as parents, it's about emotionally thinking like that, yeah, it's sad at each stage when we need to let go and hand over that independence to them. It's each kind of new stage they get to is one where we have to kind of grieve the one beforehand. But I think too, keeping that idea we talked about before about not controlling how our kids go or how they turn out is from a book I read called The Gardener or the Carpenter, and it's about parenting, talking about how, there's two approaches. We can take the approach where we're trying to fashion something out of wood with hammers and pressure and that kind of thing, or we can view it as nurturing the seeds that are there already, and we don't know what it's going to look like, but all we can do is nurture along the way. And so I think that approach makes it a bit easier for us to let go. We've taught skills, we've instilled values, and then we kind of just have to see what beautiful thing thrives from that. And what you mentioned too is, sometimes maybe making mistakes, and that's an okay way to learn as well, because sometimes our teenagers need to realize that we did know what we were talking about. They need to try it their way and then think, oh, that was actually quite stressful when I didn't do my assignment until the day before. I don't know if I'm going to do that again next time. So sometimes they need to experience it themselves so it can look a bit messy sometimes, but ultimately it's their life that they need to start making choices about. And if we've, done the best that we could and instilled the values and helped them be the person we would like them to be, we've got to kind of trust that they're going to make good choices about their learning and their life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think trust is a big one there, because if you don't trust them, then they're probably just going to go behind your back and do what they're going to do anyway. You know what I mean? At least if you're open about it, you maintain those communication channels, don't you? You can say, go for it. Go. I'm happy to step back. You do this all on your own, but just know that I'm here if you need me. That kind of gradual release and reassurance. Right.
And it's a shift between that typical parent role when our kids are small, where we are in charge, to then it having more of like a coach type relationship of, these are the things I think, this is what I notice. And your kids have a go at things and you say, how did it go for you? Did you think it worked out well, or would you do it differently next time? You can say what you think and give advice, but ultimately it's the choices for them. So it's about adjusting to that different kind of relationship.
Mm-hmm. Wow, we have gone on a long journey in the last hour and a half, haven't we?
Yeah.
It's making me feel, it's bringing back memories for me to go through this and think of those stages. They really do feel like kind of stages along there that are difficult to navigate as a parent.
Yeah.
And as we've said before, maintaining your own regulation as a parent is so important throughout this. If you become dysregulated or model, behaviours that are not ideal, I think often the way we act has way more impact than what we say. Kids take a lot of notice of what we do, very little notice, if any of what we say. And so I think... Go on.
I was going to say, I think it reminds me of this great quote about parenting that I can't remember who or how exactly they said it, but it was along the lines of that our kids learn what we didn't intend to teach. They really do learn by what we do. And so if we can try and be mindful about that and be healthy and well-adjusted ourselves by getting support, then that's what we teach them to do.
And part of the reason why I wanted to do this episode is for that exact reason. We often jump in and it becomes all about our kid, advocating for them, getting the best for them, supporting our kid. And I know from personal experience, you can just forget all about yourself in that. It can become all-consuming and stressful and exhausting. And I wanted to just put this in as a reminder, kind of speaking to my former self or my old self, what kind of advice would I like to give myself? And I think it is that one of look after yourself as well. Yeah. Because your reactions, the way you handle these situations is what your kid's going to be noticing and picking up on. And so you really do need to give yourself that time, have empathy for yourself. As you mentioned earlier on, look after yourself, find times to do relaxing things, nice things, maintain your personal level of regulation, because that really matters, doesn't it? More so than saying the right thing.
Does. Yes, absolutely, because I think that's what our kids will learn then. And you mentioned, we put everything into our kids, and it's really common for parents to do that, say, once they're okay, I'll be okay. Yeah. But really what our kids watch and learn is to not look after themselves because we don't look after ourselves. And I think the other thing too is that sometimes, because our kids are little, they don't think about it in as much detail as we do. So we can worry about how our kids are feeling and what they're thinking. But in reality, they're probably they're thinking about Minecraft or whatever. And so if we
that
can
moment's been and gone.
Exactly. But if we don't manage our own things and then we've still got some ideas about how it's going to be bad for their lives and that kind of thing, then that will eventually filter down. So if we can, it's really essential that parents look after themselves and manage all your own reactions and emotions and all of that kind of stuff, because that, at the end of the day, if you did that and then not much else for your kid will be better off still.
Okay. One final question, because we've been talking about parents, which rightly, that's what the episode's about, but now talking from the perspective of teachers and tutors. So my experience as a tutor, and I'm sure I'm not alone, and I'm sure teachers experience the same thing, is that it can be very personally overwhelming, because I see a whole lot of kids every week and they're all struggling. And I imagine you as a psychologist, you don't spend your day with happy, well-adjusted, thriving kids. You spend all your time with dealing with issues. And so how do we as teachers, tutors, counsellors, psychologists, how do we maintain that? I don't know whether it's a professional separation we need to have or techniques or tips that you've got about how do you not take on the lives of all your students, as your own problem.
I would love other people's advice on this for myself as well.
It's so hard, isn't it?
It is really hard. Again, it's about, I think, seeing what you can do and thinking about, how you do have finite energy and resources and what can you put it towards, focusing sometimes on the positive things, like the things kids would say or parents will say about things like, they're really doing so much better now. Thank you. Just focusing on those positive things, I think, is really good because it counteracts the pressure we feel, and we kind of put it on ourselves as well. But I think, naturally feel it because we want to help people, and we want the best for the kids that we're working with, much like parents want the best for their own children as well. So trying to keep in mind all the positive things and positive impacts is good. And then again, it's about managing stress levels and mental health and that kind of thing. So having little routine practices that you do daily to help with that is good. So whether it's, what you do on the drive home from work or after you finish work, trying to do something that signals the separation and the reducing of stress and tension, all of those things that are preventive of burnout and things like that would be my advice. Yeah. Small little practices every day that try and help keep things in balance.
Mm-hmm. I find talking to colleagues extremely helpful because as a tutor, like I tutor in my home and I just see kids, all day. I rarely see adults or have adult, conversations with adults. And by the time it is the evening and I've got adults to have a conversation with, I'm exhausted after a day of tutoring. But talking to other tutors, I find extremely helpful and refreshing to kind of know that you're not alone. Other people are going through similar issues and, you can talk through issues and get advice. I find that very helpful.
Yeah.
I find taking notes helpful. I'm not sure about you, but like after a session or, if I don't have time between sessions, at the end of the day, I always try and make sure my thoughts and everything is noted down so that I can kind of close the door and walk out and not have to keep mulling them over in case I forget or something. I make sure that when I finish, it's all noted down, ready for myself to come back to and tackle next time. And so I can kind of switch off a little bit, not to say I don't care about that anymore, but now is my time to care about me and think about, my mental health. And the time will come and it's noted down. I don't have to keep, rehashing it in my head and thinking about it. That's a problem that I can go and tackle at a later time.
Yeah. A psychiatrist I worked with once too was saying because we end up doing things automatically, don't we? Like for you too, you don't have a long commute home from home to.
No.
And so sometimes even if you do, we do it the same way all the time. So when it becomes automatic, it doesn't interrupt our brain just keeps going on that pattern. So his advice was to do things a bit differently. So, for example, take a different route home or stop at a different place to look at the view for a couple of minutes or things like that. So, introducing a little bit of a routine that can help you transition. But I like your idea of writing things down, and it's like you're giving your brain permission to switch off and not hang on to them. Yeah,
I don't have to keep doing that constant rumination about it. And if I find myself ruminating about it, then I try and make some notes and say I want to get this out now so that I can put it away. It's not always successful, and a difficult tutoring session or having been a teacher, a difficult lesson where things go wrong can be quite devastating. It can take some time to recover your self-confidence and composure after a difficult lesson, and they're unavoidable. They're always going to happen. So I think, as well for parents to understand that kind of giving a teacher a hard time might be really hard for that teacher to deal with as well. You know, they're just people, and so they will probably appreciate some support, you know what I mean, rather than kind of, you know, finger wagging and so on. You know, not that I'm saying people do that, but I mean, that does happen, doesn't it? And teachers do struggle. It's a very, very difficult job.
Yes. And, you know, we get advice or people tell us how we're parenting wrong, and that always feels awful as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. Leanne, thank you so much. It's been a brilliant conversation. You're so thoughtful and full of great advice and experience. I'm really grateful, and I hope everyone who listens, you know, has a chance to take some time out and think about these things for themselves and look after their own mental health as a parent, and know that it's really important to look after yourself. Now, I know you've got some courses for parents on your website.
Yes.
What does that cover? What do you offer? Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be able to share this stuff with parents who can't or haven't yet come to see somebody. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I do. And so what I do is a lot of support for parents about learning about their child and their child's needs. So it's not so much about parenting, because I think there's no right way to do parenting, but it's about making sure all parents understand their own child's needs and how they can meet them as a parent. Yeah. And so that's come out of a long career of working with kids and noticing common themes that I'm now in a position to be able to help parents with. And it's partly delivered online as pre-recorded information, which makes it easy to access and a bit more affordable, but then also with connection one-on-one and in groups as well, so that parents can actually ask questions about, but how do I implement this with my child? And if you have and it hasn't worked, then we can talk through why and try to break down that barrier, which sometimes happens where we get information and then, but we're having trouble putting it into place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one thing to know something. It's another thing to actually work out how do I do that?
Yeah,
I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't know how to make it happen.
That's right. Yeah. But on the free section of my website, where, you know, we can probably put that in the notes, is where there's the guide for advocating for your kids at school, so that parents can access that. And that's a first. There are a couple of other free resources there as well to get started with. But yeah, love to help all parents be able to understand their child and feel really confident that they're giving them what they need. So yeah, reach out if anyone wants to hear more about it, or if you have any questions, I can just happily answer them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'll put your contact details in the show notes. And, you know, you said it's not parenting advice, but, you know, if you think about all the things we've talked about today, so much of being able to maintain your self-regulation is about understanding what's going on. And that's probably, you know, going right back to where we were starting, that pre-diagnosis worry and anxiety that you have and your child might have, and then that reaction to getting the identification or the diagnosis, are all really difficult to navigate. And there is that period of time where you're hungry for information, but you don't know what information you can trust, where to get it from. You know, there's so many examples from my parenting of things that I never heard about until like years later. And I'm like, what? Really? I can ask for an individual learning plan? I didn't even know such a thing existed. And so I think it's excellent that you've got that kind of background information so parents can understand what's happening for their child and the best ways to support them, because that knowledge leads to more of an ability to feel like you've got things under control as a parent, and you can relax a little bit,
That's
rather
right.
than being in that nervous kind of, I don't know what I'm doing. No one likes that feeling, do they, of like, I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do.
No, and that's why I love what I do as well, because I think that you don't have to do it alone as a parent either. You don't have to try and trawl through the internet to find the right information. So I love being able to help parents sift through it all together.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really fantastic. As I've mentioned, people can find all the things that we've spoken about, links to resources and anything else I can think of that might be helpful, I'll put into the show notes on our website, which is at discastia.com. I do post on Facebook episodes and reminders of past episodes if you want to follow Discastia on Facebook just to keep up with what's happening. Thank you so much. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to reach out. I love getting comments and answering. So yes, please feel free to engage. I hope you found this useful. Leanne, thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone. See ya.